We actually had Connie and Lisa listed on this, but you two were sitting here. So
We are. That's why I was looking at
That's why I'm a little
Laura's
bit-
looking at me, and
But should we,
yeah, we can. I mean,
Steve,
basically,
which is your topic here then?
this is the North Star.
Okay, the North
costs
Star.
for
Okay.
healthy rivers and streams, and Lisa can't be here, but during the North Star Management Plan project, the update to the management plan, you know, Healthy Rivers and Streams has been very interested in North Star, and so obviously Open Space and Trails is the agency that manages North Star, and you know, one of the main pieces of North Star is the river that flows through it, and so what we have is, you know, I've talked to the Healthy Rivers and Streams Board and the Open Space Board, and this is one of those properties where it'd be great if we can partner, because it puts more people and more minds together on what to do for restoration in the future. And so by partnering is to also share the costs of, you know, at least the next 2 years, and let's see what we come up with. And so for 2015, you know, since the management plan has been updated, we've been working on implementing that plan. And as you can see in the costs that are laid out, you know, we're putting a lot of monitoring out on the property. We're doing, you know, soil moisture monitoring, groundwater monitoring, surface water monitoring. We did the stream bank restoration project, which was, we'll find out how successful it is next spring, but it was very successful. We got a lot of people to come out, and it was really fun to, you know, be able to do that together. And the great thing is we were able to send Lisa up with the paragliders to take great pictures of the project, and so she had a great time taking those pictures. So, and then, you know, we are, so all those costs for this year is in there. The Nest camera for the herons is not happening, but, you know, we put together a budget, and it's, you know, it's around $90,000 a year for the next 2 years. And so for 2015, we're mostly done with most of the projects, and we're cost accounting now and finishing up all the payments. But in 2016, the big thing is to really set out on a process to determine the next steps for the river through North Star. And during the process, we had a lot of different, you know, ideas. We had, you know, the consultants had different ideas, different consultants had different ideas, and so next year we would like to do a kind of a relook at the whole thing and work together between the Healthy Rivers and Streams and Open Space. But we also learned that the city of Aspen is going to be doing a river management plan that comes through the city, and they want to make sure the whole reach is looked at too. So there's potentially a big partnership that can happen here, and we want to be ready and prepared to figure out what to do. And so we put a cost number in there. We don't necessarily know what it is, but we have budgeted for the open space, you know, about $75,000, and Healthy Rivers and Streams said they would potentially like to split that. So today the supplemental is here to, you know, pay for the costs that were incurred in 2015, pay for half the costs, split it with open space, and then for 2016 set a, you know, a budget of $45,000 each. The open space program has that in their budget, and this would really set the Healthy Rivers and Streams to put it in their budget.
So 45,000 is for work already done this year?
45,000 is for work already done.
5,000 is for work done next year?
Correct.
George?
So on my question, just in your last statement, for 2016, you said you got the money allocated in the 2016 budget that we've been working on. Healthy Rivers and Stream is not in their budget.
Correct, the 45,000 has not been
But
appropriated.
it will be if we approve this?
Yes.
That's right. Since it's a multi-year project for Healthy Rivers, they did not build it into their 2016 budget, but their plan was to appropriate it now in 2015 and then carry forward part of that appropriation over to 2016.
Okay.
Okay. You answered all the questions I had in your presentation, so
Okay.
I'm good with doing that.
I'm supportive.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Glad to see the collaboration between the boards.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun. Thanks.
Okay, next we have a construction demo overage at the landfill.
Hi, I'm Brian Pettit. I'm your Public Works Director here with Kathy Hall, the Solid Waste Manager. And this should probably be titled an early termination agreement with Heartland Environmental Services, who's been providing services at the landfill since 1999. As the board knows, we're going to terminate the contract and let it expire in February 29th of 2016. Since then, I've been discussing with Larry Drew the possibility of an early termination of the contract for a few reasons. But the primary driver is that we have exceeded the 75,000 cubic yard annual limit of C&D grinding for consecutive years, really starting in 2012. In 2008, we signed a change order to grind C&D and use it as daily cover. And in that agreement, there was a limit of 75,000 cubic yards of material annually, but it never said what would happen if we exceeded that amount. One could make a claim that we would owe for that service, and while Heartland never invoiced us for that work, I believe we owe them for that overage, and certainly in the year 2015. So in working with Larry on this issue and knowing that we had extended offers to all three of his employees and they would be transferring their employment to the county, we started talking about terminating the contract early. I think Larry and Heartland are ready to move on. They've got other endeavors that they would like to deploy their equipment to and focus on other things. So in having said that, we determined that we would need additional funds to terminate the contract early. In total, it's $690,000 that we would pay Heartland. And that breaks down to this. $400,000 of that is the overage of C&D grinding for the year 2015. $120,000 of it is for December ops and C&D grinding. And $170,000 of that is for January and February operations. It totals $690,000. Once that was done, the county would take over landfill operations on December 7th, and we have all the equipment and employees in place to do that. And I think we're in a good place to complete that. We start training on the equipment tomorrow, and now that we have Heartland's seasoned employees as employees, I think we'll hit the ground running. And as part of the agreement, it would be an agreement to separate ways in good standing with Heartland after 99 years of being a contractor with the county, and I think it's a good solution for the county and for Heartland.
George?
So my question is, we had the original contract with Heartland was for 75,000 cubic yard maximum for C&D. In your memo, you said that since 2012, we've actually processed approximately 170,000 additional cubic yards. I guess my question is, I mean, that's a lot more material since 2012, and I've mentioned this before. So as the economy has been boosted up substantially, certainly in the Upper Valley, and we know all the projects that have been approved within the county and the cities, particularly commercial, including ours, that's going to accumulate probably even more C&D. And so how will we accommodate that, and is there opportunities to try to reduce that or find other avenues to divert that?
Mm-hmm. We had a discussion on it maybe a couple weeks ago. We're looking at, after we get settled down and get the operations running smooth, to potentially put in an area at the landfill larger than what the drop and swap is, to be able to pull out materials that do come in and set it aside in an area similar to, I believe, a construction junction was in Carbondale. And whether we charge a price for it, we'll probably have to man it, but yeah, we were going to look at that probably this spring, early summer, seeing if we could do that. We do have an excavator, which will be operating at the landfill, which will be able to pick materials out that are recyclable or reusable. So we're hoping to do some pretty significant sorting.
But It's a good point. We did set records this year in just C&D at the landfill for the amount of material that was coming in.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question, George, and I think later on, our upcoming agendas for future meetings, we'll be discussing the landfill rates for the next year, and I think part of how you manage the volume at some level is the rates as well that we're charging, and if we don't want to use up too much of our air capacity with that, there are probably other landfills that would take it, and it's just a matter of how we price it. So, but I agree with your point. I guess I wanted to bring up kind of a tangential issue since we're talking landfill going into the holidays, and that's to make sure that Waste Management knows that they need to do more recycling pickups during the Christmas season. I'm not sure exactly what their experience was with it last year, but even when we were doing the pickups, it could get a little unmanageable there. When it's a busy holiday season, everyone's unwrapping their cardboard boxes, and they assume they're going to drop them off and keep their living room clean, and then they get there and it's too full, and they just go ahead and dump it on the ground. So we really need daily and frequent pickups during that time period. Other than that, I would agree with staff's assessment that this is a good way to move forward, and this was, as I believe I understand, an older lingering contract from before you were our director, Kathy, and that we're looking to a lot more exactitude in our contracts now. So
That's right.
I will support this.
Yeah, likewise, that's my sentiments is this is a good time to move ahead, and Heartland did request that because they have a big project they were working on elsewhere. To bring up another related issue having to do with the Waste Management's Willits facility, and I think we should have a discussion of that at a work session sometime fairly soon because of the possibility that that facility might be closing down, or they might be requesting money from us. The town of Basalt's putting money into it now to run that facility, and I'd really be curious about the results of the poll as to how many Picken County people are using it versus Eagle County versus Garfield County people.
And I would just say, I think we need to have a comprehensive discussion because, you know, I believe the decision during budget from the city of Aspen was not to contribute to Rio Grande. We've got this question hanging out with Basalt, and we also have Snowmass, all of which are on different bases, and I think we need to have maybe a comprehensive discussion about what we intend our role to be and how to finance it, and what partnerships we're going to need to move forward that are equitable across all the entities. So just to build on that request, I think,
and we don't want to
expand that
do
discussion.
that discussion right now. We're not prepared,
Right.
to have it sometime fairly soon would be good.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I want to make sure it's a really well-rounded discussion, John, when we get there with all the background material, so that we're not scratching for information about the volumes or the costs, recovery, and things like that as we discuss it with our partners. And I mentioned it before, but as we discuss it, it'd be good to have the various ordinances that each community has related to their franchise agreements and whether it's required recyclable pickups or not, things like that. Because I think more alignment along those lines will help as well.
Okay, so this is, I mean, to me, it's an exciting time for the landfill employees to be forging on into the future of this new endeavor. And it's like passing the baton on from Heartland Industries to our staff, and having some of their former staff be some of our new staff. So
Thank you for acknowledging that. I think there is a lot of excitement at the landfill. We're hoping for the best, and I think having county employees' eyes on the material that was being buried could offer some opportunity for better recycling and separation as we move forward.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good Thanksgiving. Steve?
yeah.
I I was just gonna say, why don't we switch and do future agendas a little later? Because
That's
it
what
looks
I
like-
was just looking at that, and that's definitely the best use of people's time. So we'll move ahead to the replacement of lift 1A. And we have all the appropriate people here for that discussion.
David, come on up. Grab a chair. We'll have three of us here.
Ellen is Lance Clark Community Development, and Ellen is handing out a map that you probably all are familiar with because it was in the newspaper. And the reason we're here is we're on a little bit of a short fuse to respond to the Forest Service with comments on a proposal from the Aspen Skiing Company to replace Lift 1A. And there was some news discussion about that I'm sure everyone saw. And we have to prepare our comments by the end of November. So Ellen will be putting something together probably today or tomorrow that will go to the Forest Service. So we're here to solicit any comments that the board might have. And we can tell you some of the things that we're going to talk about. And David Corbin, the Vice President for Planning of the Ski Company, is here and can certainly answer any questions. But essentially, the replacement of Lift 1A is something that you have all heard about for several years. And the proposal is that more or less, not totally sure yet, it will begin in essentially the same place it begins now. And it will end in roughly the same place. The top terminus would be roughly the same place, but moved a little westerly to be closer to the restaurant to better allow for pedestrian access, using the lift for pedestrians both for potential future use of the restaurant and also for access to the race course. And the Forest Service has a short fuse on this because they're thinking that it might be so minimal in terms of impact to the forest that there won't even be an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement made. And Ellen did have some comments that we are thinking about that we might want to bring forward. It is the master plan done in 1996 and 97, which we know needs to be renewed and redone, which will be, did contemplate the replacement of Lift 1A. So it is part of the approved master plan with Pitkin County.
Yeah, I think the only thing we might want to relate to the Forest Service is the fact that some of the new construction, the towers, timber removal that may be required, the potential for a structure at the top terminal to house gondola cabins if this ends up being a gondola or as opposed to a chairlift. Some of those improvements may require a county construction management plan, some earth moving permits, drainage erosion control review, and then ultimately, depending on the extent of the improvements, we may want to look at some minor amendments to the county mountain master plan as well. We also recognize that this may, given the proximity to Ruthie's restaurant, Ruthie's, it's no longer Ruthie's, but that this may be a foot in the door to some, in the future, to some nighttime events of more active use of the restaurant, special events, and in the event that we go in that direction, then clearly that would also require more review and probably county master plan amendments. But other than that, I think Lance covered everything. Yeah.
I was looking at the sight line of the existing Lift 1A, And then our red dotted line, it looks like you'll have to cut a new lift line through a portion of trees there. But then I started wondering, well, where was the location of lift 1 before 1A was built? Was it, I don't recall the history of that. David,
Perhaps
could you
Dave
enlighten
Corbin
me?
can speak to that. Maybe he was here in 1947.
Down at the skier chalet.
I'm getting old, but I'm not quite that old. So I couldn't tell you, Steve, Dave Corbin speaking for the ski company, I couldn't tell you exactly where the old Lift 1 alignment is with respect to the 1A alignment or the alignment as proposed. They're all close to the same vicinity. Exactly where the cut is or how timber removal now would compare, we haven't done that survey or really plotted that out. To date, what we've done is to assess what we think would be the impacts on the federal lands, because all we've done today in the permitting process for this lift, and this lift would require city approval at the bottom, county approval through most of its length, and then federal approval where we touch upon the federal lands, which is only about 1/3 of an acre in the areas of disturbance here. We have to go through all three. We initiated the federal process first because of the NEPA or environmental review timing and the need to get their field specialists on the ground before there was a lot of snow. So that's why we went with the feds first, not yet knowing exactly where the bottom terminal would be given the land interests at the bottom, and not yet having identified exactly what our uses or proposed uses in the future might be for the building. So we know we've got to come through the county. We're in the federal process first for those reasons leading to the county's comment, but otherwise we don't have that lift alignment precisely surveyed on the ground with the kind of comparisons that you're broaching as subjects.
So the red dotted line is just an
Yeah,
approximate.
this could shift 1 or 2 degrees one way or another, and we just simply don't know yet. We were looking at what are the possible impacts on the federal lands, and that's the extent of it.
Okay. Are okay, I see the green. The green on the map is the White River National Forest.
Yeah, that's kind of the landing zone identified that would be federal land that we might impact.
Okay. George?
I'm just curious, Dave, if one of the goals is to allow passenger access to Ruthie's, which this alignment will allow a lot easier, it always seems to be the challenge, or the question is, how do you get people to the base terminal that's easy for foot passengers? Because going up the hill, going down the hill is probably not going to encourage people to actually get over to that side of the mountain to really fully utilize it.
That is indeed one of the challenges, and it's unfortunately a challenge not ours alone, given the current location of the lift and the fact that there's interceding property between our lift location and Dean Street, for example. So for the pedestrian arriving or coming across town, or say be at the bottom of the park in Dean Street, you're right, there is, even today, a significant walk to get to that lift terminal. We don't own the parcels downhill of our present lift terminal. At this point in time, there's another development interest that owns the parcels that are not public parcels below us. They already have entitlements with the city for a development with the possibility of a surface lift that might go through their property, but not a requirement, as I understand their approval for such a lift. So we can't really answer or provide the solution that you're kind of inquiring about without the participation of other private parties. There have been discussions between the Gorsuch team, if you will, that would desire to do a lodge or hotel on parcels that we currently own, but they have under contract. There have been conversations between the Gorsuch parties and the parties on owning the property north and below us, the ski company, and some representatives of the city from time to time. There hasn't been a common resolution of what is the best circulation to get there yet.
Rachel?
Yeah, you know, I am looking at this, and the old lift line, I'm wondering, will you maintain that as a ski run and kind of improve it to be a ski run? Or will you allow it to just kind of grow back and tree up? I don't have a preference either way. I know it's kind of a little bit of a off-piste type of trail now that people occasionally
Right.
take, and if you're pulling those towers out, it may need, you know, more grooming to bring it up to real true trail status, because it will be an enticement to people.
Right. My guess is, would be that we'd leave it in its cut condition and allow people to ski it, but we really haven't discussed it or thought about or heard from the Forest Service if they would like a different revegetation plan or something of that nature. Typically, we leave those old lift lines and yes, people ski them.
Okay.
You know,
But I'll
but,
let you evaluate whether
Yeah.
it would be a hazard or not, or whether
Okay.
it needs to be more, you know, especially removing some of those big concrete platforms for the towers and things like that.
Yeah, when lifts are removed, certainly, yeah, the towers are, you know, brought all the way to ground, obviously. They're cut to be as flush as possible. And if there are foundations or old concrete platforms, if you will, that remain, we do try to, you know, break those down or make that grade, you know, meet soil in a way that doesn't pose a hazard. So we do try to remove them as obstacles. So
Okay.
that should be normal course for us.
Okay. And then you kind of alluded to it. The reviews for the base are really within the city of Aspen's purview,
Yes.
and any of the potential redevelopment of private properties as well. So, but there are discussions about a potential hotel kind of at the Old Holland House site and then up and above where the land surrounding kind of your base area of the lift now.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. I think the important part to me would be that, as George alluded to, whether it's foot passengers or others, that this really remain as a you know, readily public accessible lift. You know, I don't want either the design or how it's featured within those condos that'll be around it that gives it that feeling that it's a private lift just for those folks on that side of the hill or something like that. I mean, we all know there's various times when, I don't know what type of lift you'll put in here, but when the winds are high and the main gondola is down, everyone heads over to lift 1A to go skiing. And so I just want to make sure that it maintains a, you know, a welcoming and accessible feeling to it for the general public.
And we agree, that's our goal. We don't have a desire to create a private lift here. Lifts are expensive. We actually want, you know, more access if possible and greater utilization of the lifts, you know, where we can. Obviously, just given the way Aspen Mountain is utilized today, most of the beginning, not really sort of, I should say, beginning of the day access is, you know, on the gondola side, but we too would like to see the opportunity for greater access on the South Aspen Street side and
Sure.
get more utility out of that side of the mountain. So we share your concern and goal.
Yeah, it's a great part of the mountain, there's no question about that, and certain conditions, it's the only place to be in the afternoon. So I think those are my concerns, and, you know, I'd just like to say, I think it'd be great to see the restaurant operating again, and, you know, while we'd want to look at noise and other impacts, I'd certainly be open to more night use there.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of moving ahead with this. With a little bit of nostalgia, that was the very first lift I ever went up Aspen Mountain on. And to see it changed is it brings back memories. Ellen?
Would you like us to submit scope and comments saying that, yes, generally, we're in favor of and anticipate perhaps some future involvement in terms of construction management and future amendments, but otherwise?
Yeah, and I think so, and you heard our other
Okay.
comments and concerns to be included, so that's.
We'll go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time
Thank
to come in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
You want to keep going with open discussion then, Steve?
Yeah, we could do, we sort of have 10 minutes, so let's do open discussion items first, and then if we have time, we can go back and do the future agendas.
So just a few quick items for you and also for the public. We've talked about this before, but on December 9th, we are going to be having 2 open houses for the public to look at architectural concepts for the proposed facility that we've been talking about so much during budget. The first one will be from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. The second one will be from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. We'll also be seeking comments on our Pick and Connect website in addition to that outreach effort. But what we will have at that meeting is 3 to 4 very different kind of architectural concepts so that we can get good input from the community and the folks that participate on, you know, what direction they would like to see us further pursue design on. And so we'll have those 3 to 4 concepts. We'll have the architects that were working on those concepts available to explain how they connect in with the vision statements that the board approved, what they achieve in terms of bridging the architecture and the other values, and we'll be seeking input through both a dot voting exercise and also a just open comment kind of period. So.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think that's good. I'm glad we're getting that scheduled, and I'm sure you'll be promoting it well, as Pat always does. And I'm thinking about making sure we're not crossing any lines with future approvals, even if it's just location extent. But I think it'd be good to make sure we have extended invitation more personally as opposed to just the newspaper ads or other outreach to the city council, the city P&Z, and the city historic preservation. I think those would be the 3 that would be most concerned. And then, of course, to our immediate surrounding neighbors would be appropriate too.
Yeah, and we're definitely on that. We did not have P&Z and the historical preservations. We'll add that to our.
But, you know, whether they make the meeting or not, you never
Sure.
know. But there's 2 different days, and that we really would appreciate their input early on.
Yeah, and we'll be reaching out to our neighbors at Concept 600 and Obermeyer for sure.
Okay. John, will that be here at this room?
Yes,
or?
thank you, Steve. So that's going to be in our public hearing room, first floor of 530 East Main. We will be serving refreshments for those who like to come for the food. We will have some at both of those meetings. And again, we'll have about a 2-hour run for each of those, 12 to 2 and 5 to 7 on December 9th.
Just thinking about it, I'm sure Cindy or Ellen would be able to come up with the names of the citizens who participated for a very long time on the Civic Center Master Plan effort, and I think that might be valuable as well.
I think we have copies of that, and they're listed in there, so
Yeah.
we can reach out.
Yeah, just to the extent they want to see what's coming to fruition.
Sure. Okay. Then just real briefly, a more personal reminder, I'll be out tomorrow through the Thanksgiving holiday, and then I know, unless you guys tell me otherwise, but.
Come on, we can come up with a crisis.
And then I will also be out at for CCI with you guys, so be back next Thursday.
Great.
And then that could bridge into a future agenda item, but we can go to board open discussion. Steve, that's all I have.
Okay. Any, George or Rachel, do either of you have open discussion item?
Do future agenda. I mean, for open discussion, since the chair won't be here next week, the vice chair won't be here next week, the county manager won't be here next week. I will be here next week, so I'll be happy to chair next week's work session and regular meeting.
That'd be good.
That was my first future agenda item, so is that, or you can assign somebody that's not here, you know, that's always a risk, but, okay, so
I'll do it
George,
that way.
you'll
I can
chair.
spend some time with John this afternoon, just going over the agenda.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I appreciate you doing that, and, you know, quite frankly, this is part of why I bring it up when we talk about our yearly calendars, is because literally most county managers are at these, and they have some good county manager sessions, and a lot of boards bring their entire board, so, you know, it is just Steve and I. I'm glad you're able to carry on, and I'm comfortable with the work while we're gone, but sorry we're taking John with us this time.
And then the only other thing I'd add is we had a question mark by whether we'd have an executive session on December 8th, and we do have some items to visit with you about, so we'll be taking that question mark off. And
Yeah, I
filling
think
that
that's a
out.
good idea.
And then I just note, January is pretty thin right now. I think we're so focused on all our year-end closeout activities and such, you'll start to see some of those agenda items filling out. We will need to bring back a discussion about the chair rotation going forward. I think we're pretty well set for next year. It's really, you know, looking into the future years and such that we'll want to talk about a little bit. And then I think when we have a full board, I'll bring back seeking out times and such for our retreat.
Okay.
Just for, we haven't gotten that far on the future agendas yet, but on Tuesday, January 26th, I will not be here for the work session. I'm on the National Farmers Union Policy Committee this year. I was asked to do that, so it's means a couple of weeks of work for me, one in January and one in March to go to Minneapolis for the National Farmers Union Convention, but it's an opportunity to have some input into their policy, which is very important in terms of national legislation.
Well, they are a important counterbalance to the Farmers Bureau, so I would endorse that entirely, especially on things like waters of the U.S.
John, on December 15th, the work session, it looks like it's a little awkward, the scheduling, because we start with a special meeting which will have grassroots set up, and then we go into an exec session with open space, and then we go back into a public session with open space for grassroots again. Is there a reason why the special meeting has to be first thing in the morning, or can we move that so facilitates grassroots easier, just set up once and take down?
Yeah, let me make sure there wasn't something specific to what how open space was looking to have the discussion, but typically I think we actually do the exec first anyway and then go into our open session, so let me look at that.
That's a group catch, George. If we could move our special meeting and budget items to later in the afternoon, that'd be really helpful.
Oh, is that, I'm sorry.
I think that's-
Yeah, I
I
was
think
just
that's what he's
catching
looking
up to
at.
the
Yeah,
15th, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's look at how we can move that around. I think Connie was just hoping to get it done as soon as possible on the 15th.
I actually won't be here on the 15th.
Oh, that's right.
Edmund will be filling in for me.
All right, what will we do? Okay, I don't have any future agenda items.
Okay.
Patty today, sorry about that.
You can have an identity crisis over there.
That was my fault.
Okay, ready to move on to the budget
Yeah. Steve,
summary?
Whoops, here, I tricked you here. Steve, would you mind hitting the switch for the screen?
Can we just take 4 or 5 minutes before we go to this?
Moving on, we're going to be discussing, it's like a review of all of our budget decision points. We have our esteemed accountant, Connie Garoppolo, who is our genius at pulling all of this together.
So this week and next week, we will be wrapping up our budget process and presenting some final decision points before we move on to the final readings of the budget resolutions. Today's presentation material can be found in your budget binders under the 12th tab. It's labeled as December 1st Final Budget Presentation. And then behind the presentation itself, there are attachments which include the fund balance summary of all county funds, the Pickens County Table of Organization, and also the 5-year budget plans for each fund. So that material is after the presentation in your budget binder. Today we will go through the general fund decision points in our presentation. Then we will have an overview of all county funds, and then a preview of the ambulance district budget, which will be presented to the board next week on December 1st. So our budget schedule, where have we been? We started on October 13th with an overview of all funds and highlighting our general fund. And then we moved on to the 3 different core focus areas of the strategic plan, presenting the different departments and funds more in depth and what their priorities and plans are for the upcoming budget year. During these meetings, decision points were given to the board for all of the budgets and 5-year plans for the special revenue funds and for the enterprise funds. We also had 2 other meetings on November 17th for the district attorney and the Healthy Community Fund budgets. And now next steps, today and next week, we're presenting the decision points for the general fund and wrapping up the whole process. And then on December 8th, we have the first reading of the budget resolutions and December 15th, final adoption. So 2016 budget, we identified some big rocks. We had preliminary meetings with staff and with our budget review team, which is made up of different staff members. And 3 big rocks were identified by staff, which are major countywide themes or priorities that staff felt needed to be addressed within our 2016 budget. These 3 big rocks, the first is facilities, and this was also a big rock considered in our 2015 budget process. The items that we felt needed to be addressed under this theme are long-term vision, building to both current and future needs of the organization, but in a responsible way, and then recognizing that there are also facility needs beyond the Courthouse Plaza project. The second big rock that was identified is organizational capacity. And John has told you a number of times before the metaphor of the pig and the python, and that's what staff was really feeling, that as we're coming up on a number of very large projects within the county in the upcoming years, that we need the capacity within the organization to be able to take on those projects and manage them well. These projects put increased demands on our internal services. Staff feels the need for more analysis and planning resources within the organization, and also project management. And then the third big rock is retention and recruitment, and this has a lot to do with the improving economy, that there is more pressure that the organization feels in this area as the economy improves. It includes pay and benefits, development opportunities for staff, training, and also succession planning. And so we hope that we have addressed these 3 different needs within our 2016 budgets. As we've gone into depth in the core focus meetings, we've presented these themes in a number of different ways through a number of our different budgets.
And I may just jump in, because for the public that's watching, the whole big rock discussion may not make a whole lot of sense. And so I thought maybe we should explain the metaphor a little bit. We've talked about it so much internally, we sometimes forget that our audience may not understand why we're talking about big rocks, and it's a metaphor that is used, I think, for a number of things, but first is prioritization. And the way it came to me was through a class that I took, and the professor put a big jar on the counter or table and put a bunch of large rocks in it, and asked us if it was full, and not being so bright, we said, yeah, it looks like it, and then took some smaller rocks and sprinkled it in there, and we started to catch on, and asked us if it was full, and we said probably not, and followed with smaller pebbles, sand, and finally water, and asked us what the point of it was. And you know, we struggled with it a little bit, or you can always fit more in, or what have you. Said no. If I didn't get the big rocks in first, I'd never get them in at all. And so whether it's in your life or profession, try and figure out what your big rocks are. And so we've been using that as a metaphor as we go into these challenging budget discussions where we're prioritizing limited resources, to say, what are the big rocks that we need to address, that we really need to fit in first, and maybe even make changes around. So sorry, Connie, I just wanted to
Thank
jump
you for
in. I
stepping
realized
in.
we hadn't explained that to the public, maybe.
So then, looking at the general fund, what's the bottom line? General fund operations, the 2016 budget proposes a 4.4% increase to revenue, with only a 1.5% increase to expenditures. And this 1.5% increase does include all of the additions that we have presented to you in these budget presentations. In our capital fund, the picture is quite different. We are looking at a 359% increase to revenue and a 338% increase to expenditures. This, of course, being our largest year ever in our general fund capital fund with the Courthouse Plaza project.
And that is not a 359% increase in revenues that we collect. It is revenues that we are transferring from the general fund into the capital fund.
Most of that would be the certificates of participation, so
Okay.
revenue through the certificates of participation.
Okay.
Yeah, so those will create a
Sorry.
liability going out, and it's always a challenge to know how to represent this when you're going through kind of an issuance of some kind of future obligation. And so what we wanted to show is that we're pulling enough in between certificates of participation and our existing revenue sources. So there's no tax increase or fee
That's
increase
kind of what I wanted to
or
get
that
to,
sort of
is that
thing. Yeah.
the way it just says increase to revenue, it looks
Right,
like somebody's
that-
having a really big year somewhere.
That's associated with this. It really has more to do, and what we wanted to represent to you is that we have it balanced in terms of our finances. What we are doing is creating a long-term obligation, so we're taking a lump of cash up front. We propose through certificates of participation, but as we talked to you during our budget presentation, depending on the timing and what it's looking like, maybe that's a revenue bond, maybe it's something else. We'll see as we get closer. But it really represents the funds that we're pulling in from that against our expenditures. And it's more to show balance between those two.
And then the result of the operations and capital fund is our remaining fund balance that we're projecting at the end of 2016, which is 41% of operating expenditures, or 20% of total expenditures, both capital and operating. So we maintain a healthy position for the general fund. The next page shows the 2016 budget and the 5-year plan for general fund operations. There's a lot on this chart, but if you will look at the green column that says 2016 budget, we start at the top with all of the different revenue streams for the general fund operations. Property tax, 48% of our sales tax, and so on down through each different type of revenue, for a total in 2016 of $25.9 million. Our expenditures are listed down below. with labor first, services and supplies, and so on, for a total of $26.4 million in operating expenditures. Below that are transfers between funds, both coming in and out of the general fund. And the result is a surplus in 2016 of $11,807. From that surplus line going over towards the right, you see that in each year of the 5-year plan, we do have surpluses. Our average annual surplus throughout the 5 years is $282,000. And then down at the very bottom of the page, you see our fund balance with a transfer out of unrestricted into restricted fund balance of $700,000, and then you see the $500,000 in 2016 and 17 for the library paying back the general fund, and then our ending balance in unrestricted fund balance down below that. This is a decision point for the board's approval to go ahead with the operating plan for the general fund. Questions?
We've looked at this before, and I'm totally good with the numbers. So we're keeping a healthy fund balance. We're ending up with an annual surplus, which this year would be small compared to the coming years, but we're doing a lot of projects that are starting this coming year. So, Rachel?
Yeah, 2 questions, and it's a little more on the titling perhaps. But under revenues, highway users tax, is that our mill levy, or is that the revenue from the state highway user trust fund?
It's from the state.
Okay, I just was wondering that. And then the U.S. Forest Service revenue, is that our payment in lieu of taxes?
No, the payment in lieu of taxes is the 3rd revenue line from the top.
Okay. What is that additional U.S. Forest Service revenue then? It's only in 2015.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated because, and I hope I can explain this. If not, we'll need to bring in Tom Oaken another day. He's got the full picture. We used to receive this U.S. Forest Service revenue. And then what we received in U.S. Forest Service revenue was taken off of the top of our payment in lieu of taxes.
Yeah.
We have since begun passing through all of the U.S. Forest Service revenue to the school district.
Okay, so
It's
that's
the
the secure rural
schools,
schools portion.
funding
Okay.
portion, yeah.
So maybe we should put SRS on that, even though it will be potentially going away in the future. Thank you.
Connie, when you talk about us maintaining a very healthy fund balance through our overall budget as well as through in the general budget, that healthy fund balance is to make sure that if things go south or there's any other crisis, that we're able to continue to maintain the level of programs and services that the community is used to. Or
That's right, and if you allow me to skip ahead a couple slides, we are required to maintain a certain fund balance by Tabor, which is the very bottom light green section on this chart. But then there is also a recommendation by the Government Finance Officers Association. Their recommendation is about 2 months' worth of operating expenditures, or 16.7% of your operating expenditures is considered to be a healthy reserve to have on hand in case there are emergencies, something unexpected that come up. Picken County generally feels more comfortable maintaining a higher fund balance just because of the volatility of some of our revenue sources like sales tax, which can depend a lot on our ski season. And so we typically do keep more, and that's why you see a large blue section, on this chart, which is our unrestricted fund balance. So if you take the 2 green sections added together on this chart, those equal 16.7% of our operating expenditures. And so just the green sections in and of themselves are considered to be a healthy fund balance for a county to have. On top of that, we have an average of $5.5 million in our unrestricted fund balance, which is available for the board to use should an opportunity come up, like in the past when we had good prices on asphalt and dipped into that balance to pave more roads than we had planned. So we have a healthy reserve to be able to fall back on. We feel like we're in a good position financially.
And even during the most recent downturns that the county's faced, whether it be going back to 2001 or going back to our more recent 2008, 2009 crashes, the board did dip into fund balances at those points when we had those two financial crises in order to maintain operations. And so I believe the most we dipped in was just over $1 million.
About $1 million, right? Yeah. Which allowed us to take the time to see where it was appropriate to make cuts and not make rash decisions that might negatively impact the citizens.
And so even though we're doing large projects in this budget, and when we get to the total funds, I'll talk about this a little bit more, our overall budget recommends dipping into our fund balances for these large projects. We're still maintaining a very, very healthy financial position. We have a lot of contingency room should we have an unexpected event that nature brings us, or a poor winter season, or what have you, whether it be on the expenditure or revenue side. You guys are maintaining plenty of fund balance so that you don't have to make precipitous decisions, and we can take our time to be thoughtful in any changes that we might have to make to respond to those. Or if we have an emergent situation, you have the funds available to really deal with that initial emergent situation while we figure out, do we need to get help from higher levels of government. So we're in good shape.
Good, thank you.
Very good. So I'm okay with the decision.
Okay. So that's the operating, and then next we have our capital fund 10-year plan. Here again, looking at the green column, it shows the 2016 proposed budget. And at the top, we start with revenues. Our main revenue stream for the capital fund is 52% of the sales tax for the county. That is, oops, I'm on the wrong page, about $4.4 million. We have a total of $4.9 million in revenues for the capital fund. And then we've listed the different categories of projects or areas that we include in the capital fund, all of the expenditures below: information technology, some dispatch and radio, vehicles, roads, and then our facilities. Our total proposed budget for 2016 is $26.9 million. And then down below our expenditures, you see our projection for certificates of participation in order to finance our facility project, and then our ending capital fund balance down at the very bottom of the page. One thing to note in this plan is that our expenditures throughout the course of the 10-year plan, if you average the expenditures, it's about $4.5 million every year. And so even though we have a very large expenditure coming up in 2016, we're still maintaining a good level of expenditures throughout the course of the 10-year plan in order to keep up with the other county infrastructure. Down at the bottom, our fund balances are a little low. This does include the amount that we would need to be paying for our debt service payments. And you do see the fund balance starting to creep back up towards the end of the 10-year plan. Any questions?
Connie, so on the ending capital fund balance, why does it dip substantially, not in 2017, but in 2018, and then it bumps way back up again in 2019.
It just depends on the projects that are planned each year, whether it be road projects or facilities projects. There are other facilities projects in the jail and in the courthouse that have been built into the plan. You'll see different swings year to year in what the roads department is planning. And so it does vary as we go throughout the course of the plan. And of course, we'll be making adjustments as we go along according to how we see the needs coming through.
I see one big item there is bridge capital improvement of $750,000. So that's one big expenditure that year that's uncommon.
And you do have all of the detail for all of these areas in your budget binders. There's a section in your budget binders for replacement schedules and capital plan schedules, and there it goes into more detail as far as exactly which roads or which projects are planned. This is just a summary sheet for each area.
Because with exception of the facility and the financing that we're proposing there, the county really follows a pay-as-you-go philosophy where you save up and then you spend down and you save up and you spend down. And so you tend to see, particularly on capital fund balances, that they change more. So they're going to fluctuate up and down a lot more because of the timing and size of projects differing from year to year. I think when we first, because this was part of the board's restructuring of the budget in 2012. We hadn't really done a separate capital plan before that, and we didn't have dedicated fund balance or revenues like we're trying to do now. And I think when we first started doing it, we actually had bigger swings in fund balance, and we're getting those evened out now, George, to try and time the projects, both with when do we need to replace the infrastructure, but how do we even out some of the ups and downs as we go along. So you still see them, but they're in a narrower range than they used to be.
Any other questions on the capital fund?
Yeah, up on the third line up at the top on revenue, they have core REMP grants, and some years they're 100,000 going out in future years, one year 50,000 and other years none.
Yeah, we had a couple of meetings with our capital group, and so we bring together the different department heads that are in charge of these different areas, and they take a look at what they're planning and how they can time between themselves. They want to make sure that they're aware among each other of what people are planning for which years so they can coordinate. But part of that is also taking a look at where they think there could be possibilities of grants. So these are not grants that are lined up yet, but they're just looking at the projects they're planning and saying, oh, I think that this year I could qualify for a core grant, or I think I could qualify for this grant. So right now it's a projection just based on the type of projects that they'll be bringing forward in those years.
So then the 100,000 or the 50,000 is just totally a ballpark figure on space savings, anticipating getting some sort of grant from core during that year.
That's
for
right.
A project that's envisioned or in the planning process.
And it's fairly new for us to try and project those particular kinds of grant revenues on a project basis. The risk if you don't is sometimes you're leaving projects on the table that could otherwise get done in the planning process. And so we're trying to take our most reasonable guess at what we think we'll be successful with. If we're not, obviously we're going to have to come back and talk to the board about, do we want to rescope a project? Do we want to delay a project? Do we want to draw funding from other sources to get it done? But it allows us to make decisions, I think, more realistically so that our expenditure and revenue estimates add up more closely in the future. That's our goal. But you're right, it's an estimate.
Okay. Rachel?
Yeah. As another decision point, I'm okay with the 10-year capital plan. I think it's been very well vetted and looked through, and there always will be modifications or changes. Either new projects come up or other ones drop by the wayside, things like that. I guess I would like to point out, going back for a moment verbally to the 5-year plan, that it does anticipate payment in lieu of taxes of $1,182,000 for that full 5-year plan. And over the course of that 5 years, that's $6 million. That's the $6 million that actually balances the general fund operations. And so I wanted to just point out how significant and how important it is. We have our reps, Representative Tipton, as well as Senators Bennett and Gardner, in support of payment in lieu of taxes, but that has been subject to just annual appropriations and annual wrangling with the administrations. And so I know we've had at least one member say, hey, we don't really need PILT money. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? But I just wanted to point out that how critical that component is to our plans.
And we're going to continue watching that very closely, because if that revenue source were to change in either direction, it impacts our planning going forward. And so, yeah, again, we're taking our best estimate based on what's happened in the past, even with the annual appropriations. Boy, I'd sure like to see it get out of that cycle.
We all would like to see it permanently.
Because it does create uncertainty. But what we did was we reduced from the full funding model this year and just carried it forward without any inflation or increases to try and manage a little bit of that political risk. And yeah, we're gonna have to watch it year from year, and I think we need to keep certainly our energies towards supporting those efforts of our federal representatives to continue with that important revenue source.
Yeah, this year they reduced the number that they brought for, quote, a PILT fly-in to do lobbying on the Hill. It's mostly trying to reach other offices than Western governors and Western representatives. Although there are some there who kind of like the idea of strangling communities on PILT, so that we'll support the transfer of federal public lands so we can find a way to monetize them ourselves more completely. But they had produced somewhat of a PILT handbook to try to create positive press and stories and articles. And you know, I don't think I brought it to the board to try to create more action, but you know, perhaps that's something we really should work with Pat Bingham and her offices on how do we get the word out to the general public about this, and do what we can to play some newspaper stories and let people know what it pays for. I mean, we're looking at it in our revenues of the balanced general fund, but that is an awful lot of sheriff's officers and people who are performing life safety on those areas in support of our mountain rescue efforts and any number of other areas. So I think that it's incumbent on us to make this issue a little more clear to the public, and we actually have an opportunity here because we have a lot of visiting public who sometimes catches information while they're here and brings it back to other parts of the country. Thank you.
One other question, and I just noticed this on the CDOT CMAQ grants. There's nothing being shown in the coming 10 years. And
No.
the CMAQ grant we were getting every other year, but is this just based on the current reality at the state level that money might not be there? We might get it, but we can't plan on it. Is that the thinking?
I'm not sure. I do know that they didn't feel confident putting it in any one particular year at this point.
They haven't reauthorized the transportation spending bill.
transportation
And they've had 32 continuing resolutions, so I'm sure that's why they just didn't want to.
And that's exactly right, Rachel. It's another one of these federal issues, like the one that we just talked about, PILT. We've had, I think, more experience with historically to project how that might play out. The highway spending bill, we haven't had experience where we are today without the reauthorization, and they've had all these continuing, it's very uncertain where this is going to end up now. So we did, it may be conservative, so if that CMAQ funding cycle does come back or continues to be authorized, our capital plan will look better, our fund balances will look better, but it's one that had a higher degree of uncertainty because of those, just uncertainty about what's going to happen with that bill going forward.
George?
Yeah, I mean, plus, if we were to get CMAQ funds, those funds are dedicated for a particular purpose. And
Correct.
so it doesn't fold into the general fund per se and so it's just for a program to mitigate our air quality.
Our practice has been to add instead of fund existing kind of projects, and that's another, I think, reason. Now, if we're replacing electric vehicles or such, sometimes we've replaced commuter vans, so we have offset what might be internal replacements. More and more, we've been looking externally at what can we do for
The bike sharing,
programs like the
recycle.
bike sharing program, and I think the board expressed an interest in us finding other partnerships that aren't necessarily identified. So for a lot of reasons, we didn't want to count that against our existing.
Okay.
We have the go-ahead from the board on the capital plan.
Yep. Looks good to me.
Fund balances, we spoke about. Any other questions on these fund balances? Next, we have the table of organization for Pitkin County, which goes back through 2008 all the way through the proposed 2016, showing the number of FTEs, full-time equivalent positions, for each department in the county. We've spoken at length in our different core focus budget meetings on the different needs and the different positions that we're bringing forward. Does the board have any questions on the table of organization?
Nope.
This is a decision point.
Supported.
Board,
Yeah,
okay.
I know this is sort of looking at the big picture, and we had looked at each of the individual increases and talked about the individual departments that either were gaining or shifting one from one department to another. So this is just the sum total of all those little changes we did.
That's right.
And this is where we're really adding to our capacity.
Right. We
Going
are.
back to that early page.
Yes, we are adding to our capacity in order to address all of our different projects coming up, but we're doing it with a very small increase to the general fund operating budget. It's only a 1.5% increase. So we've been able to cut back in other areas and do it in a way that maintains a healthy budget.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, as we've talked about in some of our previous sessions, some of this increase in personnel staffing is because we've done things such as taking the IT department back into the county as opposed to a joint department with the city. So while we were paying for personnel, they were showing up on somebody else's spreadsheet before than our own. And other items that have gone forward are similar to the solid waste center, and then naturally seeing an airport increase and having the demands on it and the potential construction projects going forward there. The other kind of larger increase was Health and Human Services, where there have been many state-sponsored, state-paid-for positions because the state itself has decided they need to take a better, do a better job and take a more aggressive approach to child welfare, safety, things like that. So appreciate the comparison chart. It doesn't have the little footnotes on every single one of those that maybe potentially we could do, but I just want to let the public know that that many of these were existing positions that have been brought into the county. Others are anticipating our growing needs, and others are just to accommodate those needs.
So,
I'm
thumbs
okay.
up on
Yep.
that one as a decision point. I think we're all good with that.
This is a summary table of all of the fund balances for each county fund. This is a very important chart for us. It shows where we project the beginning fund balance to be for each fund in the county, We start at the top with the general fund, operations, capital, our reserves and restricted fund balances, and then move on to special revenue funds, proprietary funds, and so on. So we start with the projected beginning fund balances, and then we add on our budgeted revenues for 2016. Then the third column, our proposed expenditure budgets for each fund. Then we have transfers that go between different funds. And we end up with our projected fund balance at the end of 2016. And this is where we look to see what percentage we have of expenditures. Are we maintaining a healthy stance? So for all of the county funds put together, we have an ending fund balance of $51.9 million. This is a decrease of about $3.6 million, but the decreases are mainly coming from the general fund facilities project and also from our housing fund, where we expect that we'll be investing possibly $8 million in employee housing projects.
You know, this is just a kind of question for future presentations or future accounting, because it's really awkward, not awkward, but obviously we're just tracking the numbers here. This is just the dollars. So we have a fund balance that says we're down X amount because of those expenditures. We should also have some sort of valuation of our assets somewhere. You know, I know it's a big task and it's something that's often put together over a period of years or specialized to given areas within the county. But, you know, it's not as if we've lost that money. That money is now in our fund balance as assets that are leased to the public for affordable housing and to county staff.
Yeah, and we do through our annual financial reports, we do have an inventory, and we actually try and have a value on all of our long-term assets, roads, buildings, and that sort of thing, and we can certainly talk about that number, because it is a large, that's a large number. I can't recall it off the top of my head, but it I think would dwarf our fund balances by quite a bit.
I'm sure.
And the challenge, and I agree with you, we can certainly bring that number forward. One of the things we're trying to keep an eye on here is what is our most easily fungible assets in terms of addressing needs.
I fully agree, and it's just kind of a footnote to the conversation.
Sure.
But when you get through of 10 years of, okay, well, our housing fund balance is down to $500,000 at the end of the 10 years, and you go, okay, well, what did you get for it?
But we might own 20 million in assets.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just something that it might be nice to give you guys a chance to noodle about how do you represent that somewhere, a page of, you know, procured asset or newly increased asset holdings or something that lets people know the money didn't go right down the drain somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we can certainly figure out, we've got to figure out how to parse that, but we do have all that information. We can share that with the public. Yeah.
Thank you.
And aside from assets, it's also what our departments have presented to you during our
Their work,
focus
they're doing, of
meetings,
course.
what they're doing for the community, or the Healthy Community Fund that has a low fund balance, but that's because they're granting out the money each year, which is what they're supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
with it.
Yeah, and that's the type of thing where, to me, you look at a 10-year number and are able to say that Pickens County, through its taxpayers and these programs, has allocated $11 million over the past 10 years that has gone to creating healthy and sustainable and safe families. You know, it's nice to be able to give the public that type of annual report or 10-year perspective or something.
Absolutely, and just to, you know, really put I think a point towards what you're saying, even though it's not quite. If we took out the facilities project and we took out our partnership, maybe, you know, where we're looking to partner in 24 units in Basalt and buy down some units. If we took just those two projects out of our proposed budget for you this year, this fund balance would grow by $10.3 million. But we wouldn't have adequate public safety resources. We wouldn't have, you know, all those things that we're trying to address through those facilities projects. But and we wouldn't have affordable housing that is
Yeah.
also highly needed right now. So that's kind of the big offset. But what that also tells me is if you take out those two just major capital projects, and they're two very large ones for the county, our operations are very much in balance and very much in surplus. Because if you take out two capital projects, you're $10.3 million ahead. Is that an accurate way of putting it? I guess you lose some of the financing revenues in there, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the time to make that point.
So this is really the whole picture for our 2016 budget that we're proposing. Are there questions on this? These numbers will be brought back to you on December 8th and December 15th. The revenues and expenditures will make up the numbers in the budget resolutions that we'll be presenting at that time.
I do have a question on insurance funds down towards the bottom. And it has a risk fund and an insurance IBNR, neither which changes. Is this kind of like just a reserve thing in case we have an issue we need to pay for?
Basically, yes. The numbers will change, but we don't have specific budgets in these areas. What we end up having is all of the different county departments bear their own share of risk and of health insurance. So each fund, each department pays their piece. And this is just reflecting the balance that we have after all of that is said and done. We are planning on dipping into possibly some of the health insurance money as we're looking at funding some programs.
The IBNR number, Steve, it stands for incurred but not reported. And so that's where maybe we're making an estimate of a liability that's been incurred in our insurance program but has not yet been reported at the time that we're doing the planning or reconciliation. This is our IBNR number right now is very generous, I think, for our risk management.
It's actually not
Is that not
reflected correctly on here. It should be about $300,000 in the IBNR line, and then the remaining balance of over $3 million is just the fund balance for health insurance.
So we can maybe
I'll
break
correct
those
that.
out. We've combined those historically because it's really it's almost like your reserved and unreserved fund balances. Your IBNR, you're reserving out. So that's the 300,000. The 3 million then is fund balance to absorb additional risk. So we're very healthy in that regard, and that provides us some flexibility moving forward.
And for the risk also, that's the IBNR for health insurance and risk are based on our actuarials that we receive every year. So it's the professionals who are taking a look at it and evaluating our risk and letting us know how much they think we should be setting aside. Other questions? Okay. The pie chart shows all of the proposed 2016 expenditures for all county funds. Just a snapshot of where we're planning to spend money in 2016, a total budget of over $105 million. And as we went through our budget presentations, we presented the expenditures to you according to our core focus areas. So we have the flourishing natural and built environment with $59.6 million proposed in the budget. Facilities is obviously the largest area of this section, with transportation through our transit sales and use tax as the second largest area in that core focus. Livable and supportive community has $27.8 million in the proposed 2016 budget, with housing and public safety making up the larger sections of this area. And then the prosperous economy with $17.6 million, And the airport is the largest area of this core focus section. Throughout the budget process, we've touched on each of the different success factors under the core focus areas of the county strategic plan. We've had different department heads speaking to you about the 2016 initiatives that they're planning. And we believe that our 2016 budget touches on these different success factors, these core focus areas that will help to further the county's strategic plan. The ambulance district will be here next week to present the budget, but we wanted to give you a preview of what's coming up. In 2014, the voters approved an increased mill levy of .501 mills for the ambulance district fund. But the commissioners decided last year in the budget process to reduce this mill levy to 80%, or .4 mills, and not collect the full amount that was authorized. For 2016, the preliminary recommendation is to set this at a level of 90% of the authorized mill levy, or .45 mills, in order to build up some reserves going into a possible building project for the ambulance barn. And so this is a decision point that will be brought next week to the board, but we wanted to give you a preview and highlights of it since a couple board members will not be there next week.
I appreciate that.
And I'd like to hand out a revised 5-year plan for the ambulance district.
Thank you, Connie.
I had a little miscommunication with facilities and the amount that they needed in the design and planning phases for a new ambulance barn, and mistakenly removed $300,000 from the 2016 budget that they say, no, we need that.
Okay, I see it.
So that's the change that is on this.
We have not changed the recommendation, though, on the mill levy going to 90%, assuming construction happens in 2017. We think that mill levy still provides adequate reserves for the construction project.
Well, the public approved it very strongly, and I think it's been wise and appropriate that we've been able to kind of ramp it up excuse me, towards that full implementation. You know, we may or may not need to go to the 100%, but going to 90 now gives us a better shot of not having to go to 100%. So I appreciate that.
Right, the top line on this chart does show the property tax revenue, and it does show it at a level of 90% throughout the 5-year plan. That gives about $1.1 million in revenue for 2016. Expenditures with the facilities plan money added back in are about equal to the revenues, with a $32,000 surplus according to this plan. That leaves the fund with a fund balance of $346,000 at the end of 2016. As you'll see under the facilities section, there is an estimate of $6 million for a new ambulance barn in 2017, which would need to be financed through some kind of debt service, whether it's certificates of participation or some other mechanism. And then you see $375,000 as an estimate on a debt service payment from 2017 through 2020, and of course that would be ongoing for a number of years to come. And then down at the very bottom, the last line is the ending available fund balance if the mill levy stays at that 90% level of .45 mills. this would be the result of a fund balance.
It's a different picture than we've been able to present you in the past with that mill levy. It's really helpful.
Let's see, the 6 million construction of the new facility, is that paying that back is the 375,000 on the line above that?
That's correct.
And then that goes out farther than the 2020 budget till it's
That
all
would go
paid
out
off.
probably 20 or 30 years, yes.
Okay,
Steve?
yeah.
Again, maybe this is something we can go into at greater depth at some point in the future. But how do we determine the fleet cost center dollar numbers?
So the fleet cost center is based on fuel usage and also on parts and maintenance. So Jonah Frank is the one who works on the numbers for that. They have their own process of tracking the different parts that they use for different vehicles and accounting for it and tracking the fuel that the different vehicles use so that they can assign the correct share to each different fund and department within the county.
Okay, and so do they also include their utility use at the Public Works facility and water use and, personnel, our insurance on personnel and the healthcare costs, things like that?
Yeah, so we have an overhead allocation that takes all the indirect costs that gets allocated to all of these expenses also. And so we're tracking the direct costs for fleet maintenance through Jonah, and then the indirect costs for like utilities and insurance and
Maintaining our facility.
Our time talking about this and those sorts of things are captured in that overhead calculation, which goes into the fleet cost center. Yeah, so
Okay.
the answer is yes, and it's a very thick book that allocates all of that.
Okay, and you've been involved in reviewing those and you feel they're accurate allocation?
Yeah, the allocation is actually driven by an Office of Management and Budget circular that comes out of the federal government. We actually hire a group that does that allocation for us because we use it for reimbursement on federal grants. So it's pretty strictly reviewed and regulated, so I have a high degree of confidence in that process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, because I just know that we've taken kind of a lot on for other
Yeah.
agencies and want to
Yeah,
make
no,
sure.
we feel like we're covering ourselves there.
Great, thank you.
So we're not asking for a decision point at this moment, but just did want to give the commissioners who won't be here next week the chance to weigh in on the mill levy and take a closer look at the ambulance district budget.
Yeah, I'm in favor of increasing from the 80% to the 90%. And, just to note for the public's sake that we're not doing the 100%, we're still keeping it below that line. And, but this is to help pay for the new ambulance barn, which is very much needed, so.
Any other questions?
I would just like to take the opportunity to thank staff, particularly Connie, and all the staff that was involved from the budget review team on in putting together what is a pretty comprehensive, I think, plan for next year and the next 5 years, in some case 10 years, that I think is both feasible, responsible, and really responsive to community needs. So just to publicly thank staff for that work. I want to thank you guys. George, I'm going to thank you twice because you're going to sit through the same presentation twice, actually, so we can capture everyone.
Maybe I'll get it a second time.
Right. We've had you really reviewing with us in great detail and asking great questions and keeping us on our toes throughout the process, catching things in these complicated documents that maybe we miss. I know it's a lot of work and a lot of demand on your time to review all of this, and be in these meetings with us. So thank you for your hard work through the process.
I would just like to echo that for staff. And when I think about having to try to digest over $100 million budget, it could be somewhat overwhelming, to say the least. But the way staff has presented this, segmented it out, and had explanations has been very easy to follow. So I want to thank you for that.
Can only echo the same, and as I said at the beginning of our process, you have apologized for our time and energy and everything repeatedly, but it really is a very pleasurable part of the year for me. It's a great review of what's been accomplished in the previous year, what the goals are for each department in the future years, how we're spending our money, and you know, it's great. We're televised with Grassroots TV. It's a very open, transparent process, and you know, next year we're going to have a contest. Who can stump Connie on some detail of the budget? It doesn't matter how big or how small. But she is a mastermind of this and details, and I know everyone in every department depends on you so much, and they look over their shoulder fearfully if they don't see you in the room yet when they're making their presentation. So thank you again for making all the pieces fit together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a fitting last slide could be to have the python up there with 2 or 3 lumps in it going instead of just the one big bump. But and each of those lumps represents a big project that we're tackling right here, and the county staff is amazing, you know, really amazing and able to handle these big projects, and we can really be proud of the staff we have. And the budget represents all the things we've accomplished in the past, and then the upcoming projects that we're doing that will make this a better county government and more responsive to the citizens.
Very good.
I think that's all we have for you today. I think we've done open discussion and future agendas. I think this was it.
Oh, really? So you got staff here for any particular reason?
Yeah, we have some staff people here. They either want a party or they have...
They're coming to see if you had any changes to the budget, I think.
Now, are we too late for open discussion?
Yeah.
Well, we can go back to
We can go back to it.
Discussion. I'm sorry. What?
About the U.S. Forest Service review of...
Oh, good Lord, that's right. Yeah, we did that at 11, but we can come back to it. Yeah.
That was 12:20. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes. So we had one item we wanted to talk to you guys about, and I apologize. Cindy and I talked about this yesterday.
We're scheduled to go to 1. We're ahead of time.
And you may have seen in the paper that the Forest Service is looking at reissuing permits up in Lanedo, and so we wanted to just review with you what we know and see if you wanted us to weigh in on that at all.
Rachel sent us the notice that the Forest Service put in the paper, and it starts a 30-day review period. And Ellen and I took a look and talked to staff about it, and apparently in previous years the board did not want community development to comment on Howard's operation on the forest. So we wanted to ask you whether or not you'd like us to do that, but we actually think it may be more of a GR kind of an issue, given the road and all of the issues on the road that may or may not occur given the operation. So both of us are here to hear what you'd like us to do with that review.
You know, yeah, I did get it because I was on the email list more than anything. I didn't see it in the paper, and forwarded to request that Cindy make sure that the Woody Creek Caucus received the notice as well, so they could make some comment. And for me, I suppose, quite honestly, I'm not sure what the time period is in my mind right now, but I'd like to talk to our attorney first. I know part of the snowmobile permit issue was a settlement that the Forest Service made over the Lanedo Road issues. And so, I just don't want to step all over that in some way that I don't realize right now. And so I think it's really something that we should take advice of our attorney before we consider making comments. you know, and certainly you guys can be invited into that session, but I don't want to try to, you know, talk around it, and there was a lawsuit settlement, and we were not a party to that, we were not trying to, so I'd rather get walked through it.
Yeah, that would be the prudent thing to do, and I mean, I was looking through the proposal that, with great interest and a million questions, but the first questions should be
Yeah.
the legal aspects of
Well, and
it.
if you guys can meet with our attorneys first to go over where it lies and what you think the concerns are, so that they're fully briefed when we brief, because I know we are going to be on a little bit of a shorter timeline.
Yeah, I think it started, 30 days started when it was in the paper, and I'm not sure when it was in the paper now, so.
Yeah, I think the 8th is our soonest opportunity with everybody here, and we may have some other executive items, John, so just make sure we have enough time scheduled to get to all of them.
So GR and I will talk to John Ely and come back and talk to you on the 8th if that's the direction we should take.
Okay. That's the only thing I can think of.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good Thanksgiving. So now that's it.
That's all I've
Okay,
got.
is that all she wrote for today?
Well, I would just say, I was just looking at future agendas again. If for some reason the 8th is starting to get filled with exec items already, Tuesday the 15th, it looks like we could always do an exec as well.
We are, let me see if everything's made it up there. Tuesday the 15th is looking pretty full.
Well, I'm looking from 3:15 on, after the break, it's just an open discussion till 5. There's nothing, you've got board discussion
Oh,
for
I see.
15 minutes
Yeah,
and adjourn
yeah.
at 5, so it looks like there's an opportunity to put in the exec in that day.
Yeah.
I think it'd be prudent just to have one prior to the end of the year and.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
as
rather than
well,
trying
on
to,
both of those days,
because December 8th, I think that exec is going to be,
pretty full.
will take up all that time in terms of some of the items we already need to discuss.
Yeah. So, you know, perhaps John and John can get together to determine which are the
Yeah.
most timely, based on deadlines for comments and things like that. And just arrange those two schedules, but have an exec on both days, and if we don't need them on the 15th, we can cancel. You know.
Okay.
Okay,
Motion to adjourn?
well, we don't have to have a motion to adjourn.
I
All we
know,
have to
I
do
just
is wish
like-
everyone a happy Thanksgiving and,
Safe travels.
yeah, Rachel and I won't be in next week. Thank you, George, for taking over running the meetings next week. And thank Grassroots for the good job you always do.
All right, thank you. Goodbye, Grassroots.